Welcome back to the channel where we remember the women who once lit up the screen, the stage, and the hearts of millions. Today, we step into one of the most heartbreaking chapters, stories of American female celebrities whose lives ended in a quiet, haunting grip of water. Some went in joyfully, enjoying simple moments like swimming or traveling, never knowing that this would be their final journey. Others, silently struggling inside, chose to let the water take them away from their pain. These weren't peaceful goodbyes, but sudden, heartbreaking endings that left behind endless questions and aching voids. Behind every name was a woman with hopes, dreams, and battles unknown to the world. Let's take a quiet moment to honor their memories, to remember the last moments before the water claimed them, and to feel the weight of lives taken too soon and too sadly. Today, we remember Natalie Wood, a gifted American actress whose life ended far too soon in one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking and mysterious tragedies. Natalie tragically drowned on the night of November 29, 1981, off the coast of Catalina Island at the age of just 43. She had been on a yacht with her husband Robert Wagner, co-star Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain. That night, witnesses heard raised voices and later, screams for help that were never answered. Her body was found floating in the ocean the next morning, wearing a nightgown, socks, and a down jacket, with fresh bruises on her arms and a cut on her face. A dinghy was beached nearby, but no one knows for sure how or why she ended up in the water. For years her death was labeled accidental, but with conflicting accounts, reopened investigations, and bruises that didn't quite match the story, suspicion has never really faded. In 2012, the cause of death was changed to drowning and other undetermined factors, and by 2018, her husband Robert Wagner was officially named a person of interest. Her final days were supposed to be filled with promise. She was filming what could have been a major comeback movie, Brainstorm, and was planning a return to the stage. Instead, they ended with silence, confusion, and grief. Natalie's death left behind not just a mystery, but a deep sorrow among fans who had watched her grow up on screen. She started acting at just 4 years old and stole hearts at 8 and Miracle on 34th Street. As she got older, she continued to amaze, earning 3 Academy Award nominations for roles in Rebel Without a Cause, Splendor in the Grass, and Love with the Proper Stranger. She became an icon in West Side Story and showed her incredible range in Gypsy, Inside Daisy Clover, and Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice. She was known not just for her beauty, but for how real she felt on screen, showing both strength and vulnerability in ways few actresses could. Behind the camera, Natalie's life was just as complex. Raised by Russian immigrant parents, she was pushed into fame by a controlling mother, struggled through personal pain, and still managed to fight for her career, her family, and her identity. She married Robert Wagner twice, had 2 daughters, and took breaks from Hollywood to find peace and raise her children. But even in semi-retirement, she left a mark. Her work in television earned her awards and reminded everyone of her talent. Natalie Wood wasn't just a star. She was a survivor of Hollywood's golden era and a voice for women whose lives weren't always picture-perfect. Her death may still raise questions, but her life gave us unforgettable performances, iconic films, and a legacy of strength and heartbreak. Her story is one of talent, tragedy, and a mystery that may never truly be solved. Naya Rivera, a gifted American actress, singer, and model who rose to fame for her unforgettable role as Santana Lopez on the hit series Glee, and whose life came to a heartbreaking end on July 8, 2020, in a drowning accident that shocked the world. That day, Naya had rented a boat at Lake Peru in California with her 4-year-old son, Josie, hoping to enjoy a peaceful afternoon on the water they'd visited many times before. But what began as a simple outing turned into tragedy. Authorities say the two went swimming, but Naya never returned. Her son later told investigators that she helped him back onto the boat before disappearing under the surface, her last act being one of love and protection. Her body was found 5 days later, and the autopsy confirmed she drowned accidentally. It's believed she used all her strength to save her child, but didn't have enough left to save herself. That painful image of her calling out for help before vanishing will forever haunt those who loved her. Naya was only 33 and at the time, she was between seasons filming Step Up, High Water, still actively working and building her career. Her sudden death left fans, family, and the entertainment world in deep mourning. Born in Valencia, California, Naya started acting before she could walk, appearing in commercials and landing her first major role on the royal family at just 4 years old. But it was Glee that made her a star, where she not only sang and acted but also gave voice to underrepresented communities. As Santana, a young Latina cheerleader navigating her sexuality, she became a symbol for many LGBTQ+ youth who had never seen themselves on screen. Off-screen, Naya was an outspoken activist, dedicating herself to causes like LGBT rights, immigrant support, and women's rights. She released music, wrote a candid memoir called Sorry Not Sorry, and wasn't afraid to open up about struggles like anorexia, heartbreak, and motherhood. Her life wasn't always easy. She faced personal battles, career ups and downs, and intense public scrutiny. But through it all, she remained devoted to her son, her family, and her fans. Her relationship with Josie was the center of her world, and that makes her final moments even more devastating, knowing she gave her life to protect him. Naya's story is one of talent, resilience, and love, but it's also a reminder of how fragile life is. In just a moment, someone so full of light and promise was taken away, and the silence she left behind is still heavy years later. But even in death, her legacy lives on, in her performances, in the lives she touched, and in the little boy she saved with every bit of strength she had left. Dawn Brunshaw, an American animal trainer whose life was heartbreakingly cut short in a way that still haunts those who knew her and those who watched her perform. Dawn was best known for her work with killer whales at SeaWorld Orlando, where she spent over 15 years becoming not just a trainer, but the face of the entire park, featured on billboards and in commercials, adored by guests and respected by her peers. But on February 24, 2010, during what seemed like a routine Dine with Shamu show, everything went terribly wrong. Dawn was finishing up a performance with Tilikum, the largest orca in captivity, when he suddenly grabbed her, either by her hair or arm, eyewitness accounts differ, and dragged her into the water. Despite desperate efforts by staff to intervene, Dawn was pulled under repeatedly and held beneath the surface for more than 45 minutes. When Tilikum finally let go, her body showed the horrifying truth. She had drowned and suffered brutal injuries, her scalp torn off, her arm severed, her spine fractured, and multiple bones broken. The autopsy ruled her death as drowning and blunt force trauma. This wasn't the first time Tilikum had been involved in a death. He had already been connected to 2 others, but somehow remained in performances. Dawn had always known the risks. She even acknowledged them in interviews, but she loved the whales deeply and believed in her work. Born in Indiana as the youngest of 6 kids, she had dreamed of becoming an orca trainer since a family trip to SeaWorld as a child. She made that dream real, earning degrees in psychology and animal behavior, starting her career with dolphins, then finally working with killer whales in 1996, the same year she married SeaWorld stunt performer Scott Brunshaw. Her dedication was unmatched. She trained tirelessly, stayed fit, volunteered at shelters, and cared for animals at home. But her tragic death exposed a dark side to the business. Following the incident, federal investigations by OSHA revealed that SeaWorld had long been aware of the dangers, yet still allowed close contact with orcas. New safety rules were enforced, and trainers were banned from entering the water with the animals during shows. Her death also became a turning point for SeaWorld itself, sparking outrage, legal battles, and the eventual release of the documentary Blockfish, which forced the world to confront the ethics of keeping killer whales in captivity. Though her family has said that Blockfish doesn't tell Dawn's full story, they're grateful it brought attention to serious issues. And while SeaWorld tried to distance itself from blame, the truth was undeniable. Dawn's death wasn't just an accident. It was the result of years of overlooked warnings and repeated mistakes. Today, she's remembered not just as a trainer, but as a passionate, kind, and brave woman who lost her life doing what she loved. Her family started the Dawn Brunshaw Foundation in her honor, to help children and animals in need, and to keep her generous spirit alive. Dawn Brunshaw didn't die because she was careless. She died because the system around her failed to protect her, and because a powerful animal, broken by years in captivity, snapped in a moment no one could stop. Her death was devastating, preventable, and unforgettable. Bobbi Kristina Brown, a young woman born into fame and tragedy, whose life was filled with dreams but ended far too soon. Bobbi Kristina, the only daughter of music legends Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown, was just 22 years old when she passed away on July 26, 2015. Her death mirrored the tragedy of her mother's, found unconscious in a bathtub after a mix of drugs and alcohol left her unresponsive on January 31, 2015. Despite being placed on life support and moved between hospitals and a rehabilitation center, her condition never improved, and she spent nearly 6 months in a coma before dying from pneumonia brought on by immersion and drug intoxication. The medical report showed she had marijuana, alcohol, morphine, and medications for anxiety in her system. What made it even more devastating was the eerie similarity to Whitney Houston's own death just 3 years earlier, who was also found in a bathtub under almost identical circumstances. Bobbi Kristina's final days were filled with confusion, sadness, and unanswered questions, including disturbing allegations against her boyfriend Nick Garden, who was later found civilly responsible for her death and ordered to pay millions to her estate. Though it was never confirmed whether her death was accidental or intentional, it was clear she had been deeply struggling since her mother's passing. Born on March 4, 1993, Bobbi Kristina lived her whole life in the spotlight, often seen at award shows and on television with her famous parents. She appeared on reality shows like Being Bobby Brown in the Houstons, On Our Own, and even acted in Tyler Perry's show For Better or Worse, hoping to follow in her parents' footsteps. She was described as sweet, sensitive, and incredibly close to her mother, who often called her the reason she kept going. But after Whitney's sudden death, Bobbi Kristina was never quite the same. She talked about feeling her mother's spirit, tried to start her own career in music and acting, and clung to a relationship with Nick Garden that many felt was troubled from the start. Her life was not just shaped by fame, but by pain, family conflict, and public scrutiny. She had so much potential, so many dreams, and despite her efforts to build a future, the weight of grief and the dark cloud of addiction took it all away. Her story is one of a young woman caught in the storm of fame, loss, and heartbreak. Bobbi Kristina Brown didn't just die too young. She left behind a legacy of sorrow and a reminder of how devastating emotional wounds and addiction can be. Her death was not only a tragedy for her family, but for everyone who watched her grow up and hoped she'd find peace after so much turmoil. Now, she rests beside her mother, both of them forever remembered not just for who they were, but for everything they went through. Jessica Savage, a rising star in American television journalism whose life ended in one of the most haunting and tragic ways imaginable. Jessica was just 36 when she drowned inside a car that sank into a rain-soaked canal in New Hope, Pennsylvania, on October 23, 1983. She had just finished dinner with her boyfriend, Martin Fishbein, an executive at the New York Post. It was raining hard, visibility was poor, and after mistakenly taking a dirt road out of the restaurant parking lot, their car plunged off the edge of the old canal towpath, landing upside down in just a few feet of water. The car's doors were sealed shut by thick mud, and both Jessica and Martin were trapped, helplessly gasping for air in the darkness as the water rose. By the time the wreckage was found hours later, it was too late. Both had died from asphyxiation. Jessica was found in the back seat next to her beloved dog, and the image of that moment would forever haunt those who knew her. In the weeks before her death, Jessica had already been the subject of whispers and speculation. Just 20 days earlier, she appeared on air slurring her words and speaking incoherently in a live NBC News Digest update, fueling rumors of drug abuse and emotional collapse. Her agent said she was under medication from a boating accident, while Jessica claimed it was a teleprompter failure, but the damage to her credibility was done. Still, NBC had just extended her contract, and she was being considered as a replacement for Jane Pauley during maternity leave. Her final days were filled with the pressure of a public breakdown, emotional instability, and the fading of a career she had fought so hard to build. Jessica's journey began in Wilmington, Delaware, in 1947. She lost her father when she was just 12, a trauma that deeply shaped her. Her childhood was filled with hardship, but she found her calling young, reading news and spinning records on the radio as a teen in New Jersey. She worked relentlessly to prove herself in a world that didn't welcome women in journalism. She became the first female anchor in the South at a Houston station and later rose to stardom in Philadelphia, where viewers adored her. Her presence on camera felt intimate and warm, like she was speaking only to you. In 1977, she became one of the first women to solo anchor NBC nightly news on the weekend, a massive milestone in a male-dominated industry. She hosted PBS's Frontline, made history, won awards, and inspired countless young women to follow their dreams. But behind the camera, her life was full of pain, abusive relationships, failed marriages, drug addiction, isolation, and mental health struggles that no one took seriously. She often suffered in silence, trying to hold it all together. Her death wasn't just a tragic accident. It was the devastating end of a life spent battling personal demons while climbing to the top of an unforgiving industry. Jessica Savage deserved more time, more peace, and more understanding. She broke barriers and opened doors, even if her light was dimmed far too soon. Mary Mara, a talented American television and film actress who tragically passed away at the age of 61 after drowning in the St. Lawrence River while swimming near her sister's summer home in Cape Vincent, New York. It was a quiet Sunday morning on June 26, 2022, when police were called to the river after someone reported a possible drowning. Her body was discovered shortly after 8 a.m., and the investigation later confirmed she died of asphyxiation caused by warm water drowning. There were no signs of foul play, no trauma, and nothing suspicious, just a heartbreaking accident. She had gone for a swim, something so normal and peaceful, not knowing it would be her last. Mary had moved back to her hometown after retiring from acting, choosing a slower life near family after more than 30 years in the spotlight. She was known for powerful roles that made people feel something, like Loretta Swede in Or, a struggling single mother fighting cervical cancer, and Inspector Bryn Carson in Nash Bridges, where she stood her ground in a male-dominated cast. But behind those characters was a real woman, born on September 21, 1960, in Syracuse, New York. Her father worked at the State Fair. Her mother was an accountant, and Mary grew up in a home that encouraged creativity. She was close with her siblings and always had a drive to express herself. She started a theater company while attending San Francisco State, then earned her master's degree from Yale School of Drama, one of the most respected acting programs in the country. Her career took off in 1989 with her role in The Preppy Murder, and soon she was sharing the stage with stars like Michelle Pfeiffer and Jeff Goldblum in Twelfth Night. Over the years, she showed up in some of the most beloved shows on TV: Dexter, Ray Donovan, Law and Order, NYPD Blue, Star Trek, Enterprise, and Shameless, just to name a few. She also appeared in films like Love Potion No. 9 and Mr. Saturday Night, where she played Billy Crystal's daughter. Her performances were never about flash. They were honest, raw, and deeply human. Those who worked with her say she was electric on stage, funny, deeply kind, and totally herself. In 2008, Mary quietly battled cancer and went through chemotherapy while still performing in live theater. Even then, she kept pushing forward. But in her final years, she pulled back from the industry and chose a quieter life. When she died, tributes poured in from those who loved her, including friends, co-stars, and longtime fans. Everyone said the same thing. She was real, one of a kind, and gone too soon. Mary didn't chase fame. She chased truth in her work, and she gave everything to the roles she played. Her drowning was ruled an accident, and though she likely slipped under the water while swimming alone, the full truth of her final moments remains painfully unclear. What's certain is that a woman who gave so much to the screen died in a quiet river she likely found peaceful, far away from the noise of Hollywood. She left behind a stepdaughter, siblings, and a body of work that will never be forgotten. Mary Mara's story ended too suddenly, but the emotion she brought to her characters, and the heart she shared with the world, will always live on. Virginia Woolf, an English writer whose brilliant mind left behind some of the most powerful and groundbreaking novels of the 20th century, but whose life ended in heartbreaking tragedy. On March 28, 1941, at the age of 59, Virginia walked into the river house near her home in Sussex with her coat pockets filled with heavy stones and let the cold current take her. Her body was found weeks later, and her death was ruled a suicide by drowning. This final act came after years of battling severe depression and mental illness that had haunted her since her teenage years, worsened by repeated personal losses, including the deaths of her mother, her half-sister Stella, her father, and her brother Thoby. Virginia had suffered multiple breakdowns throughout her life, endured horrifying treatments in institutions, and fought through long, painful periods of darkness where even her writing could no longer save her. Her husband, Leonard Woolf, who deeply loved her and stood by her side for 3 decades, recognized her slipping away in the days leading up to her death. The terror of World War II, the bombing of their London home during the Blitz, and the fear of another mental collapse overwhelmed her. In her final note to Leonard, she wrote that she felt certain she was going mad again and wouldn't recover this time. But Virginia was more than her final moments. She was a literary force. Born in 1882 into a wealthy and highly educated family in South Kensington, London, she grew up surrounded by books and great minds and began writing at a young age. Her childhood summers in Cornwall left a mark on her soul and inspired much of her fiction. Despite not being formally educated like her brothers, she immersed herself in her father's library and later attended lectures at King's College London. After losing her parents and brother, she moved with her siblings to Bloomsbury, where she became a central figure in the influential Bloomsbury Group. Virginia married Leonard in 1912, and together they founded the Hogarth Press, which published her work and that of others. She wrote some of the most celebrated novels of her time, Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, Orlando, and The Waves, alongside the feminist classic A Room of One's Own, which argued for women's right to creative space and financial freedom. Her writing broke from traditional storytelling and captured the chaos and beauty of human thought through stream of consciousness. Virginia also had deep romantic relationships with women, most famously with writer Vita Sackville West, who inspired Orlando. Yet behind her literary genius was deep emotional pain, much of it rooted in childhood trauma, including sexual abuse by her half-brothers. This pain never left her, and though she often used writing to stay afloat, it wasn't enough in the end. Her death by drowning was not just an escape. It was a descent into silence after years of noise in her mind. Virginia Woolf left behind a legacy that changed literature forever. She gave voice to women, to mental illness, to the invisible struggles inside the mind. And though she is no longer here, her words still echo in the lives of readers across the world. Carol Wayne, the beautiful, bubbly television actress who brought laughter and charm into millions of homes as the iconic matinee lady on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, but whose life ended far from the stage lights, in silence, in mystery, and in heartbreaking tragedy. In January of 1985, Carol was vacationing at the luxurious Las Hadas resort in Manzanillo, Mexico, with a man named Edward Durston, a car salesman with a strange past. After what was described as an argument, Carol walked out alone on the beach and never returned. 3 days later, a fisherman discovered her body floating in Santiago Bay. She was only 42. No alcohol or drugs were found in her system, and the official cause was listed as accidental drowning. But the details surrounding her death never sat right with those who knew her. Her family, friends, and fans have long whispered about possible foul play. Her companion, Durston, had also been connected to another tragic Hollywood death years before. The eerie coincidences and lack of clarity have left a permanent shadow over her final moments. Carol had just posed for Playboy the year before, trying to make ends meet after filing for bankruptcy. Though still known for her bright smile on screen, behind the scenes she was struggling financially, emotionally, and perhaps mentally. Her last film, Heartbreakers, had given her the best reviews of her life, and she seemed to be fighting to rebrand herself as more than just the blonde comic relief. Born in Chicago in 1942, Carol's life had always been wrapped up in show business. As a teenager, She toured the country as a figure skater in the ice capades alongside her younger sister Nina, giving up her childhood and her education to chase a dream. An injury from a fall on the ice left her with a permanent scar and pushed her away from skating for good. She and her sister became Las Vegas showgirls. Then Carol moved into acting after being spotted at a Hollywood party. Her big break came in 1967 when she joined Johnny Carson's Tea Time movie sketches as the ditzy but lovable matinee lady. With over 100 appearances, Carol became a household name known for her exaggerated innocence, curvy figure, and perfect timing. She guest starred on classic shows like I Dream of Jeannie, Bewitched, and Love, American Style, often playing the kind of characters who were underestimated, but always unforgettable. But as the years passed, the roles became fewer, the offers less glamorous, and the reality of being typecast settled in. She was married and divorced 3 times, including to music photographer Barry Feinstein, with whom she had her beloved son Alex. By the early 1980s, Carol was trying to rebuild her career and her life. But Hollywood can be cruel, especially to women aging out of the roles they were once adored for. Her death in Mexico left behind more questions than answers. No one truly knows what happened to her on that beach, why she was left alone, and what thoughts filled her heart in those final hours. What we do know is that Carol Wayne, with all her light and laughter, didn't deserve such a lonely end. Her legacy lives on not just in the laugh she brought, but in the quiet sadness of a woman who gave so much to show business and never quite got back the care and protection she needed in return. Katusha Nyong'o, a trailblazing Ghanaian model, activist, and author whose life ended in a heartbreaking tragedy. Known in the fashion world as the Pool Princess, Katusha became one of the first African women to conquer the international catwalks in the 1980s, rising to fame as the unforgettable muse of Yves Saint Laurent. But her final days were marked by mystery and sorrow. On the night of February 1, 2008, she returned to her houseboat on the Seine River in Paris after a party, and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. Her purse was later found untouched on the boat, raising concern and confusion. For nearly a month, her family and fans waited helplessly, hoping for answers. Then, on February 28th, her body was discovered floating under a bridge. She was just 47. Authorities said there were no signs of violence, believing she fell into the river accidentally and drowned, possibly under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Still, questions lingered. Her family never fully accepted the official story, and many felt there was more to what happened that night. What hurts even more is that Katusha had already survived so much. Born in Guinea, she was the daughter of famous historian Djibril Tamsir Niane, and grew up in political exile due to her father's conflict with the regime. At just 9 years old, her life was torn apart when her mother tricked her into undergoing female genital mutilation, an act she later described as the day her childhood ended. She was sent away to Mali for safety, where she endured more trauma, including sexual abuse. By 17, she was a teenage mother and had fled to France, chasing freedom and a dream. Against all odds, she became a modeling sensation, walking for fashion giants like Thierry Mugler, Paco Rabanne, Christian Dior, and eventually Yves Saint Laurent, who saw in her something timeless. With her fierce beauty and elegance, she redefined what it meant to be a black model in a white-dominated industry. But behind the glamour, she struggled with pain, substance abuse, mental health challenges, and the lifelong emotional scars of her past. She later channeled her voice into activism, founding an organization to fight against the same mutilation she once suffered. In 2007, she bravely told her story in a memoir called In My Flesh, where she opened up about her demons, her survival, and her search for healing. That same year, she made her film debut in Ramada, playing a woman trying to find herself in a changing world, a role that mirrored her real life. Though her modeling days were mostly behind her, she remained a symbol of strength and resilience, constantly trying to give back and raise awareness for women's rights. Her death wasn't just the loss of a fashion icon. It was the silencing of a voice that had fought so hard to be heard. Katusha's story is not just about beauty, fame, or tragedy. It's about the fight to survive when the world gives you every reason to give up. Her legacy lives on in her children, especially her daughter Aiden Curtis, now a successful model herself, and in every woman who dares to stand up against injustice. Katusha Nyane was more than a muse. She was a warrior in heels, and the world is dimmer without her. Maria Montez, the Dominican actress once crowned the Queen of Technicolor, who tragically passed away at just 39 after drowning in her bathtub following a sudden heart attack. An unexpected and heartbreaking end that left her fans stunned across the world. It happened in her home in Charentes, near Paris, on September 7, 1951. She had reportedly been taking a hot bath when the heart attack struck, and with no one there to help in time, she slipped under the water and died. Her husband, French actor Jean-Pierre Amont, found her too late, and the news of her passing spread quickly, cutting short the life of a woman who had become a symbol of escapist fantasy during World War II. Her final days were spent in Europe, planning a return to Hollywood that sadly never came. She had just finished work on her last film and was looking forward to new opportunities when everything suddenly ended. Maria had always lived in a whirlwind, from her early days in Barahona, Dominican Republic, where she was born Maria Africa Gracia Vidal in 1912, to her modeling days in New York, and her swift rise in Hollywood thanks to her exotic looks and glamorous style. Though critics often dismissed her acting, audiences loved her. In films like Arabian Nights and Cobra Woman, she played beautiful princesses and mysterious enchantresses, always dressed in dazzling costumes, giving moviegoers a break from the grim realities of war. She didn't have classical training, but she knew how to work the camera, and more importantly, she knew how to turn herself into a star. Behind the scenes, she was fiercely determined, using the press and public appearances to stay in the spotlight. But despite all her success, Maria longed to be taken seriously and often fought with studios to be cast in different kinds of roles. When Hollywood began to move past the kinds of fantasy films she was known for, Maria left for Europe with her husband, trying to reinvent herself. She starred in several European films and even started her own production company, but she was never able to fully escape the shadow of her earlier Technicolor image. Just as she seemed ready for a comeback, death took her without warning. Her daughter, only 5 years old at the time, was left without a mother, and the film world lost a vibrant, unforgettable figure. Though many may not know her name today, Maria Montez helped shape a moment in Hollywood history and remains a symbol of both the magic and the cruelty of fame. Her beauty was legendary, but her end was sudden and quiet, a stark contrast to the grand stories she once lit up on the big screen. Sally Brampton, a brilliant English journalist and writer whose life ended in one of the most heartbreaking ways imaginable, by walking into the cold sea near her home in St. Leonards, East Sussex, on May 10, 2016. She was just 60 years old. Sally had spent years battling severe clinical depression, and despite reaching out for help in her final months, the support she desperately needed never came. A letter from her psychiatrist in March had clearly stated she was in crisis, experiencing suicidal thoughts, feeling hopeless, helpless, and barely able to get out of bed. But health services failed her. Just weeks before her death, she tried again to get help, but critical information never made it through, and she was marked as out of crisis. In truth, she was quietly losing her fight. Sally's tragic end was ruled a suicide, and her final moments, walking into the sea alone, paint a picture of just how deeply she was suffering. She had written powerfully and painfully about this struggle in her memoir, Shoot the Damn Dog, opening up about the raw reality of living with depression. A darkness, she said, wasn't about choice, but about defeat after trying for so long to stay alive. Born on July 15, 1955, in Brunei to parents Pamela and Roy, Sally's early life was shaped by constant travel as her father worked for Shell, and she ended up attending 12 different schools around the world. She studied fashion at St. Martin's School of Art and went on to win a competition that landed her at Vogue, then became fashion editor of The Observer by 1981. But her most iconic role came in 1985, when she became the founding editor of British Elle magazine. She helped reshape what a women's magazine could be: bold, stylish, intelligent, and unafraid to challenge norms. She famously banned the word diet from the magazine, pushed for diversity by putting a young Naomi Campbell on the cover and refused to use underweight models. Sally wasn't just creating magazines. She was changing lives, especially for young women who saw themselves reflected in her work for the first time. She later wrote novels, became an agony aunt in the Sunday Times and Daily Mail, and gave honest advice that touched thousands. But even with all her success, her own pain never truly went away. She married and divorced 3 times, and though she adored her daughter Molly, she continued to live under the weight of mental illness. She found moments of peace in her garden, in writing, and in helping others. But the battle with depression eventually took everything from her. Those who knew her said she was elegant, warm, and fiercely intelligent, a woman whose voice helped shape an entire generation of female writers and editors. Her legacy will always be that of a trailblazer, a truth teller, and someone who showed the world that even those who shine the brightest can sometimes be the ones hurting the most. Sally Brampton's death was a terrible loss, and while she couldn't find the light at the end, she gave so many others hope through her honesty and her words. She didn't just drown in the sea. She drowned in silence, in pain, in a system that failed to hear her cries. But her voice still echoes, and it matters now more than ever. Dolores O'Riordan, the unforgettable Irish singer and songwriter whose powerful voice carried deep pain, truth, and beauty across decades. She tragically passed away on January 15, 2018, at just 46 years old, found unresponsive in the bathtub of her London hotel room, having drowned accidentally while heavily intoxicated. That night, Dolores had called her mother at 2 a.m. and left a cheerful voicemail for a friend just hours before she died. She had flown to London to work on new music, seeming hopeful, even excited about her next steps. But when her lifeless body was discovered that morning, with empty liquor bottles nearby and a blood alcohol level more than 4 times the legal driving limit, it became painfully clear that this wasn't a planned goodbye. It was a quiet, devastating accident. Dolores had lived through so much darkness. She had suffered from depression, trauma, bipolar disorder, and long battles with mental illness that often left her isolated and overwhelmed. She spoke openly about being sexually abused as a child, which haunted her for life. Her marriage had ended, she had struggled with breakdowns, public incidents, and deep loneliness, and yet she always came back to music. She gave the world her voice, a voice that could cry and soar in the same breath. As the lead singer of the Cranberries, she became globally famous with songs like Zombie, Linger, and Dreams, carrying Irish rock into every corner of the world. Born in County Limerick as the youngest of 9 children, Dolores started singing before she could even speak. Music was her lifeline. From humble beginnings to massive success, she stayed grounded in who she was, wild, bold, vulnerable, and deeply human. Her journey was one of both immense talent and unbearable pain. Though she found joy in her children, her faith, and her music, there were times when the weight of her past and the pressures of fame were simply too much. In the end, it wasn't the fame, the heartbreak, or the illness that took her. It was a quiet night alone in a hotel, alcohol numbing the pain, and a tragic accident that stole her away. The world lost a soul who sang straight from the heart, who carried her wounds in every note, and who left behind a legacy that will echo for generations. Dolores O'Riordan didn't just sing. She made people feel something real. And even though the song has ended, the voice that gave so much to the world will never be forgotten. Marie-France Pizier, a gifted French actress, screenwriter, and director, whose life ended in a way no one expected, tragically and mysteriously drowned in her own swimming pool at the age of 66. On the morning of April 24, 2011, her husband, Thierry Funk Brentano, found her body fully clothed, floating in the pool of their villa in Saint-Cyr-sur-Mer. Her head was oddly wedged between the bars of a pool chair, and even after extensive investigation, no one could say for certain how she died. Was it a tragic accident, a suicide, or something more disturbing? The autopsy could not even confirm if she had drowned or been placed there after her death. And with no sign of foul play, the case was quietly closed, leaving behind more questions than answers. What added to the mystery was what she had discovered shortly before her death: serious allegations of sexual abuse within her own family that she threatened to expose. Some believe that this knowledge, and the pressure it brought, might have played a role in her sudden death, though it was never proven. It's hard to comprehend how such a bright and courageous woman, so full of elegance and principle, could vanish in such a silent and unresolved way. Marie France wasn't just known for her beauty, though she had plenty of that, but for her sharp mind, bold spirit, and deep involvement in the French New Wave cinema. Born in 1944 in what is now Vietnam, she moved to Paris at 12 and by 17 was discovered by the legendary François Truffaut, who cast her in Antoine and Colette. Their professional and personal relationship would define part of her early career. She later starred in acclaimed films like Cousin Cousine, Barraco, The Brawny Sisters, and Celine and Julie Go Boating, for which she also helped write the screenplay. She twice won the César Award for Best Supporting Actress and even tried her hand in Hollywood, though France remained her artistic home. A fierce advocate for women's rights, she stood up for what she believed in, signing the Manifesto of the 343 and participating in protests during the student uprisings of the 1960s. Despite facing and surviving breast cancer in the 1990s and building a rich life with her husband and 2 children, her final chapter was filled with sorrow and silence. Her tragic and unexplained death has left a painful hole in the world of cinema and in the hearts of those who admired her. Marie France Pizier lived with grace and strength, but the way she left this world was far from graceful and far from fair. Her voice, both on screen and off, deserved to be heard longer. Whitney Houston, the iconic American singer and actress whose voice once moved the whole world, but whose life ended in a way that still breaks hearts to this day. Whitney tragically passed away on February 11, 2012, at just 48 years old, after being found unresponsive and face down in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles, just hours before she was set to attend a star-studded Grammy party happening downstairs. Her cause of death was ruled as accidental drowning, but it wasn't just the water that took her. It was a deadly mix of heart disease and years of cocaine abuse that finally wore her down. The toxicology report confirmed she had cocaine in her system at the time of her death, along with other medications, though only the cocaine and her weakened heart were named as the final triggers. Her assistant had just stepped out, and when she returned, she found Whitney submerged and unconscious. CPR was attempted, but it was too late. What made it even more painful was knowing that Whitney had looked forward to that Grammy weekend and had been seen just days before performing Jesus Loves Me at a club, showing flashes of her old self. Though many said she looked disheveled, sweaty, and not herself, signs that something was very wrong. In her final hours, she had called her mother, sounding completely fine, which made the sudden news all the more shocking. But behind the scenes, Whitney had been struggling for years. Her marriage to singer Bobby Brown had been full of chaos, addiction, and emotional abuse. Drugs had robbed her of her once flawless voice, and though she tried rehab several times and even made a small comeback with her 2009 album I Look to You, she never fully recovered. Born on August 9, 1963, in Newark, New Jersey, Whitney came from a gospel-rooted family and began singing at church as a child. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a respected gospel singer, and her cousins included Dionne Warwick and Dee Dee Warwick. Aretha Franklin was her honorary aunt. Whitney had a once-in-a-lifetime voice, so pure, so powerful, that she was nicknamed The Voice, and no one doubted why. Her debut album in 1985 became the best-selling debut by a solo artist ever, and hits like How Will I Know, Saving All My Love for You, and Greatest Love of All made her a global superstar. She later broke records with the Bodyguard soundtrack and her unforgettable version of I Will Always Love You, which stayed #1 for 14 weeks and remains one of the best-selling singles of all time. She won Grammys, sold over 220 million records, starred in major films, and for years, stood as the gold standard of vocal talent. But behind all the fame and awards was a woman who battled pain, pressure, and addiction. Her decline in the 2000s was hard to watch. She looked thinner, her voice was strained, and she often seemed lost. Yet people close to her always said she had a beautiful heart and a deep faith in God. In fact, gospel music stayed with her all the way through her final recordings. In her last year, she had been working on the film Sparkle and was even in talks to join the X Factor. She was trying to rise again, but her body, after years of drug abuse and heartbreak, could no longer carry her. Whitney died alone in a hotel bathtub just before the music industry was about to celebrate her one more time. Her daughter, Bobbi Kristina, who meant everything to her, would die 3 years later in a hauntingly similar way. Whitney Houston's death wasn't just a loss, it was a deep wound to music, to her fans, and to everyone who had watched her rise, fall, and try to rise again. She gave us everything she had, and though her voice is gone, it still lives in every note she ever sang. Florjana Ismaili, a bright and beloved Swiss footballer whose life was tragically cut short in a heartbreaking accident that shocked the entire world. Florjana, just 24 years old, drowned after jumping from a rented boat into Lake Como in Italy during a holiday on June 29, 2019. She never resurfaced. Her body was found 3 days later, deep beneath the water at 204 meters. It was a horrifying and sudden loss, and the news left her friends, teammates, and fans shattered. An autopsy confirmed that she died from asphyxia caused by drowning. In the final moments of her life, what was supposed to be a peaceful day on the lake turned into a devastating tragedy, as hope faded slowly over the following days until the worst was confirmed. Florjana had been captain of BSC Young Boys Frauen and was a strong figure in Swiss women's football, known for her determination, joyful spirit, and leadership. She made her debut for the Swiss national team in 2014 and earned 33 caps, scoring key goals in important matches. She had recently played what would become her final international game just 15 days before her death. Born in Switzerland to Albanian parents, she had worked hard to earn her place in the sport, rising from a young hopeful to a national star. Her teammates and coaches described her as a fighter with a constant smile, someone who lit up the room and gave her all both on and off the field. Tributes poured in from across the world, from fellow players, coaches, and even football federations, each expressing deep sadness over the loss of a young woman with so much talent, heart, and promise. She had been named in the Swiss League's Team of the Year 4 times in a row, and was loved not only for her skill, but for her character. She should have had many more years to play, to inspire, and to live, but her story ended far too soon in that silent, dark lake. Florjana Ismaili's death reminds us just how fragile life is, and how even in moments of peace and joy, tragedy can strike without warning. Her memory will live on through the legacy she left behind in Swiss football, and in the hearts of those who loved her.